Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 2. I am Sophia Robinson, and I'm a writing coach and an editor and a story listener, as well as the producer of Writing Black Joy, a virtual space that celebrates, centers, and promotes the voices of Black writers and storytellers with joyful and uplifting stories. Here, you'll find conversations with some of my favorite Black writers and storytellers, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, hear more about their creative process, and find inspiration for your own creative ventures, as well as tips and strategies for writing poetry, blogs, creative nonfiction, fiction, plays, and so much more from all types of writers, as well as a sneak peek into the writing life. You can even find your next favorite writer, book, poem, play, or blog. And if you are a Black writer who is looking for a coach or an editor to help you bring your joyful story into the world, then click on my website below to find out how to work with me. In the meantime, let's go to today's guest. My guest today is Yvonne Ator. She is a multi-passionate writer at heart who writes haikus, newsletters, poetry, and whatever else takes her fancy. She's also the coach behind the Thriving Idealist, and she coaches high-performing, stress-addled individuals who have hit a wall and want a different life but have no idea where to begin. Now, one of the things Yvonne and I talk about is WDS, and you'll hear her mention WDS a few times. And WDS is the World Domination Summit. If you want to know what it is, I'd have to say it's a gathering of creatives. I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but I always describe it as a conference because it's kind of hard to describe it to anyone who hasn't actually been there. But I've also had a couple of other guests who were WDSers. There was Jeff Harry from season 1 and Gary Ware, whose episode dropped a few weeks ago. So when you hear her talking about WDS, that's what it is. Yvonne and I also talk about her writing journey and how writing was a constant part of her background. How the pressure to go into a traditional profession meant that she dismissed her writing abilities for years. Why she is taking back the term idealists, which I love because I'm a bit of an idealist. You're going to hear about that more in the conversation. She talks about her journey with writing daily haikus and building the habit of consistently creating and sharing them, no matter if she thought it was good or not. And we talk about how she moved out of hiding and into plain sight, as well as so much more. And as always, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hey everyone, welcome back to Writing Black Joy. Today I'm joined by my twin, Yvonne. We met at an event and instantly we became twins. So yay. Thanks.
Oh, we do look alike. And I cannot believe you have dimples. I don't think I ever noticed that you had dimples.
Yeah,
you have the same kind of dimples.
I know. See, because we're twins, of course. So Yvonne is many, many things. I'm going to let her do a bit of an introduction for herself. And obviously I've said a few things about her already, which you would have heard in the introduction. But Yvonne is a writer at heart, which is my favorite kind of writer. And we also have many other things in common. So we're going to dive into that. Anything else you want folks to specifically know about you before we get started, Yvonne?
But I didn't start off as a writer. I think so my background, I have a background in medicine and public health. And I did go to med school, got my medical degree, and then got a master's in public health. And, the whole journey, the whole purpose, initial plan was, become, a doctor and do medical missions and travel around the world and save the world that way. But looking back, I even realized that my application for med school was actually probably because I probably knew how to write or that I loved writing. Right. And so my application was actually about doctor musicians because I'd read an article about doctor musicians and I play guitar. And I was so amazed that there were doctors who were musicians as well. And I wrote a whole thing that had nothing to do with medicine. I just wrote this whole thing about how it was meant to be, blah, blah, blah. But I'm realizing that most of the things I've gotten into is probably because I wrote something really passionate. Yeah. And that was what got me in. But as a child, I was always a reader. And as a child, this probably give you some insight into me because I've already mentioned medicine and music. But as a child, I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer.
Okay,
I liked
interesting.
planes, yes, but that's not why. So as an adult, recently I realized, looking back, I was a huge reader, and the reason I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer was because I liked those two words together, and I liked how aeronautical was spelled.
Well, that's a great reason to go into a career. I don't know how you would have felt about it when you got there, but because one of I had a roommate at university who studied aeronautics. She ultimately became an attorney, but yeah, sometimes some things sound much more exciting than they actually are
Yeah.
when you dive into it. And I think that like last time Yvonne and I had a conversation, we have so much in common. So most people don't know what I actually do for a living. I hardly ever talk about it, even though I know that you know what I do, right?
Yes.
And so also in healthcare, also did public health, was totally fascinated by it. But and one of the things that I don't know if you've ever heard of narrative medicine, but it's something that I become pretty obsessed with recently. And I was like, if I was 10 years younger, I'd probably go and study it now. So even in the whole healthcare thing, I was always a reader. I always liked writing, and
Yes.
I enjoyed it. I always loved a good story. I love to tell a good story. I love to hear a good
Yeah.
story. So even
Yeah.
this podcast, I'm loving having all these conversations, hearing all these stories, and kind of like sharing them.
Yeah.
So
And
that is,
you're a dentist, right?
I am a
You were.
dentist.
It's
Yes,
funny. I studied dentistry. I was on the path. I first chose dentistry before I switched to medicine. So that's so that's so
yes,
interesting.
yeah. I know, right? I almost never tell people what I do because I was saying there must be a lot of people out there on the internet who are thinking, "Gosh, what does she do for a living?" She's like, I never ever talk about my day job, but yeah, I am a dentist
It's
for
part of
quite
it's a
some
part of who you are.
time. So glad to have you. So tell us a bit about your writing journey. I know you've been obviously published and in many capacities, big and small. So tell us a bit about your writing journey.
A writing journey. So like I always start off as being a reader because I say that because like so part of my journey, I was born in the UK, and I was a pretty big reader then, and then my family moved to Nigeria. My family is Nigerian, and what I remember the most about my years in Nigeria before we went back to the UK and then came here, during my years in Nigeria, I was known as the bookworm. Like I was always reading, but like the idea of writing was, I never thought that that was, and I just thought it was the things that the books came from people who were amazing somewhere out there in the world, right? It was not part of my environment. So I didn't know anything about writing. I thought it was something that, the British writers did and then sent to us, right? I read a
Mm.
lot of Enid
Enid
Blyton
Blyton,
and
me too.
yes,
What?
yeah. And so like, it was just this thing that was so far removed. So when I was like in middle school, high school, I was in this gifted school, the first one in Nigeria, and they drafted all the kids from all over the country, the quote unquote kids with the highest IQs, and like they've created a special school for us, and they shipped us off to this school, and it was there that I started like seeing that there are kids who could write. I didn't think I could write. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, you're supposed to either do medicine, law, accounting, engineering, or architecture, or right. So like I was already like thinking about which funnel I was going to go through. So like I never thought about writing. But I remember we would have these writing exercises, and my teacher was always like, too short, too short. And I was always like, does she like, why is she always saying too short? I just thought, writing exercise, just wrote what you thought and that was it. But apparently looking back now, like she saw something in me and wanted me to explore like my ideas more. It seemed like something about how I was expressing myself she was very interested in. So that was like, I feel like that was the very beginning of my journey. When that teacher, whoever she was, I just remember always like all of my assignments too short, too short. And so that then made me feel like, oh, maybe I do have something to say and she thinks
Mm.
I have something to say. So I need to start expanding on my idea. So that was the first time. Then the second inkling about writing came like in my late teens, when I was seeing someone, and just like, I don't know what happened, but I'd never written a poem before, but I knew he loved me and I was trying to like do something for him. So I wrote him a poem and it was like a page long poem. I just remember talking about the king because his name was, had king in it. And he was crying when I was done. Like when I gave it to him, he was crying and he was telling everybody about it. And like, I was just like, I just wrote something and I mean, and it wasn't really like intentionally a poem. So those were the first two times I was like, I think something about the way I express myself has an impact on people. And then when I came to the States and then I had to for it's just part of assimilation. Most times when immigrants come here, they have to like remediate a lot of their journey. And even though I was already in college in Nigeria, I had to go back to high school. So when I was in high school, because I was already young, I started college at like 16. But when I was in high school here in the States, there was an essay. So it was my first time being in an American high school, and we were in the South. I didn't think anything of it, but they had this award. I think it was like Daughters of the Confederacy, like something award. And I didn't know anything about it. But it was a scholarship. There was some kind of scholarship, and I didn't know anything about the scholarship. But we're supposed to write about something that had to do with like an unexpected thing. And I remember writing about how when I was in the UK, I just arrived from Nigeria and on a trip, and somebody had helped me with my suitcase. And I wrote about how the person didn't care about what I looked like, the color of my skin, I think, and just like helped me out. And I was talking about how like it was important to something about that. So apparently the teachers couldn't decide who won, or rather maybe looking back, it would have been weird for me being the only Black kid to win it. So they had, and again, I was a new kid. It was my first year there, but they had all the seniors vote on who should get the award, which is interesting because they didn't read my article, my essay. So it became like they allowed the high school students to pick who was going to get the award, even though we're supposed to write the essay for it. So I'm suspecting that, right? So some popular kid who they had to decide between our essays. And so they couldn't decide. So then they had the high schoolers, the seniors vote, except that they didn't read the essay. So looking back now, I'm like, huh? but that was another time when I was like, oh. And then there was another assignment where we were reading what was it? What's this thing you read in high school? But I had to be the bard. I was going to be a bard. And
is it like the Odyssey?
It was not the Odyssey, but something like that though. And we all had parts to read. And for the homework, I was just supposed to like write something like, playing the role of the bard. And I wrote my first song. I wrote a song and performed it for the class. And they were just like, whoa. So like, it was these like things that I would just do, just thinking I'm just doing random stuff, like no brainer. And each time I would do it, people would go, okay, like, wow. And so that was when I started realizing, okay, there's something here. But again, I was on the mission. I was going to be a doctor. And, so this is just something that apparently has an effect on people, but oh, well, whatever. But over and over again, there was this thing of like, when I have an assignment, I didn't really sit down to write, but if there was something that I had to do when I would write something, it would be, this thing that was well received. I ended up being the salutatorian when I was graduating from high school, and I had to write something, same thing, I had to speak, and I was the new kid. So there are these little dots. I've never really talked about my writing journey. This is the first time I'm talking about it. But it was obvious that there's something there. But again, I never thought, just like with music, I just never, when you're programmed to think about only 5 professions, right? That's all you think about. And so these things you do, if you're good at something and it's in your face, you don't really think about it. You just think about it as something, you don't even think you're good at it. You just say, okay, this is something I'm doing. And then you just move on. And it wasn't until like, even in med school. So like there are just these little dots, these little like pointers. Now that I look back in med school, I applied. I was going to be a Schweitzer Fellow. I wrote about Albert Schweitzer and how much he meant to me. Albert Schweitzer is this musician who became a physician and spent the rest of his life in Gabon, had a hospital called Schweitzer, and he's pretty well known, like Nobel Prize winner. And he's a huge mentor of mine, like just a spiritual guide that I kind of look at, follow after. And I was even the one that wrote for my I wrote a few poems submitted to the med school journals. And then I was the person who wrote the class's final words, like the goodbye, like the,
Yeah.
So, and I was also the one that was picked to say something for the cadaver that we dissected. It's now all coming back together. So I had a really powerful experience with a cadaver that I was dissecting, and I got to speak at its funeral, like the man's funeral. As we were, kind of saying goodbye to the body. And I spoke about my experience and the spiritual awakening I had from it. So like just looking back and connecting the dots, something about the way I express myself in writing apparently does connect. So, so that's kind of like but it was never something that I grew up. I think I didn't grow up with my dad. And looking back, I spent a couple of years with my dad in my teens, and I saw that he was always writing in a journal or a book. So I suspect that I didn't see any of that growing up. I grew up with my mom's family. I didn't see, nobody read that I remember. And it was after I moved to my dad's in my late teens for a couple of years that I saw that side, that there was somebody, is probably actually in my DNA, somebody who writes, somebody who reads, who was a reader, who was a writer. So I suspect that I got that, I know I got that from my dad, even though I didn't grow up with him, but the few years I spent, I definitely saw that that's where I got it from.
And what does your writing sort of look like now? I'm curious because I know, and do you still practice medicine? Because I know
no,
you do a lot of support for physicians, but I wasn't sure if there was some little bit of practice in there that you still did.
No.
Okay. So
no, not at all. So I'm, I guess, what you call a multi-passionate person. So obviously I went to med school and did the medicine thing. And I had a pretty intense burnout experience after I became a mom. And I just felt like the ideals that brought me to medicine were incompatible with what I was actually practicing on the ground. And being away from my kid, working those 80-hour weeks, spending all of my time doing things other than helping people, I just didn't feel in alignment. And it started creating this, burnout, to the space between your practice values and your professed values, the things that you say are important to you. That space is where burnout lives. And I was so far away from the things. My work is called the Thriving Idealist, right? Yeah. So I'm such an idealist. I really believe in sacrificing for the ideals you hold dear, that you're, wanting to do everything you can to master yourself, to embody the ideals that you feel like are important to you. It was not sustainable for me to live a life where I was obviously not being of service the way I felt I needed to be of service. So for me, I took a break from medicine and went into public health. And it was during that time in public health that I discovered this whole world. The thing about being in medicine, or any silo for that matter, is that you're in a silo. You think that that's the only world there is. And then you realize there's this whole big world out there. There are writers, there are books, there are personal development. Where have you been my whole life? And I discovered the world of personal development. I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which, interestingly, I was given that book in the first year of college, slacked off, didn't read it for the leadership program I was in. I was like, whatever. And then it came back to me again, like 10, 15, 20 years later. And I read it and I just had this, so like just my mind, it just was like, I was like, where have you been my whole life? And I was like, the world is so huge. I wanted to know more about personal development, organizational development. I wanted to learn more about burnout. I wanted to learn more about how do you thrive doing what you love. And I want to make a difference in the world. I wanted to be, more in the humanitarian side of things. And for me, it just made more sense to spend some time exploring that. And during that time was when some of you have heard my story, if you're from the WDS space. During that time was when my dad died during a physician strike, during which He had been in a coma, had a stroke, was in a coma in Nigeria, and the doctors over there went on strike. And when they're on strike over there, they discharged him while he was still comatose from the ICU to some random clinic somewhere, and he was dead within 24 hours. So for me, it was kind of like, I want to know what this thing is, where like when you're so far gone from the ideals that brought you to a profession that it just doesn't matter anymore. Like the vows I took, whatever, doesn't matter anymore, right? How do you deal with that? And so that was the journey that I got set on. And on that journey was when I started discovering like the World Domination Summit, Good Life Project, like these, Jonathan Fields, Scott Dinsmore, like Chris Gillibo, it was like I entered this completely different portal, and I saw that ordinary people, these people that I was idolizing were just like me, and they were writers. They were all writers. And that was when writing became normalized to me. That's when I realized, oh, like this is something I can actually do. And this is actually core to who I am without realizing. So entering those universes was really like a huge affirming, kind of like a coming home. I call those two places the World Domination Summit and the Good Life Project, my motherships. It's funny that they're both dissolving, but that was when I saw people who could write about anything. And that was when I feel like my writing, discovering Scott Dinsmore and James Clear in particular, those two people, learning about habits from James Clear, and then learning about connecting with people and starting a website from Scott Dinsmore. That's when I started blogging because of Scott Dinsmore. That is also
when I started blogging. It's so funny that you should say that, because I hadn't even thought about that. But Scott Dinsmore used to run this challenge. Start your blog in 7 days, something like that. And I joined that challenge. Like I'd been talking about starting a blog for years and years and years. And then one day I get this email and I'm like, oh, I'm going to join this thing. And I joined the community. That is where I met the person who told me about World Domination Summit in that blogging Facebook group, because he had a blog. He's unfortunately passed away now, but he had a blog called Create Good Mornings. And
that's interesting, because Scott Dinsmore passed too, and he
did. Scott Dinsmore passed away as well.
Live your legend.
Live your legend, right? Yes. And so I was in the Live Your Legend blogging group. I met Craig, who was the guy from World Domination Summit, and we were blog buddies. We used to read each other's blogs and give each other feedback. And that was, I always say, like that was what caused me to start my blog, because I used to love writing emails to my friends. Traveling, I would travel and I'd write these long epic emails about where I was visiting and whatever. And I kept saying, I'm going to start a blog. But having that space of other writers who were all starting out as well, and who were giving you feedback and kind of like almost like building you up in a way to kind of have a space to share, because I've always been a believer in sharing. Not that you have to share everything that you write, but that like it is the act of sharing your writing that gives you the courage to share it further. So first you have to find like a safe space to do that. And for me, that was the Live Your Legend blogging group. And so that's where I had met Craig Kulik. And then he actually gave away, every year he would give away a ticket to World Domination Summit in a raffle, and I won it. And that's how I met Yvonne.
Wow.
And also who've been on this show already, Jeff Harry was on season 1. Yes. Gary Ware, I don't know whether his interview will be before or after yours, but he's on this season. His book is coming out. So it's been, it's so strange to think of how those little, I always think about the internet and the world like that, like random person here, random person there, connecting all these dots, and all of a sudden you're like doing burpees outside of
oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, I had the burpee season for a while. All the burpees are gone now.
I met Yvonne doing burpees every morning outside of the hall. Okay. And I was
and I wasn't this crazy person. There was a purpose. And that's the one thing you're going to know about me. There's always a reason, a purpose behind anything that I do, which I'm trying to work on, because I need to learn to play more and just do things without any meaning, without any purpose behind it. But I was doing the burpees. I'm part of, so I obviously I'm a coach. I don't know, you're going to hear from my story, from my introduction. I am certified in many different certifications as a coach in positive psychology, as a personal and executive coach. Now, that was what I was trying to say. Like after the burnout experience, I started focusing on physicians mostly, but then also like other helping professionals and leaders who are mission driven, kind of like the idealists who are being of service and trying to make a difference in the world, and who have sacrificed a lot to be of service. So I wanted to help them thrive and help them, also continue to make the difference that they're here to make in the world, but to be able to do that in a sustainable way. And that became like my mission. And it called me. I didn't go looking for it. It called me and grabbed me. And so we've been on this journey together. So I serve as an advocate, but I'm a coach and I'm certified in positive, as a personal executive coach in positive psychology, because I wanted to know everything there was about resilience and thriving for the specific person who is mission driven and heart centered, who went into their profession specifically to make a positive impact and then finds themselves like, what am I doing? Where am I? I'm burned out, compassion fatigue. Like I have sacrificed so many years, so much blood, sweat, and tears. Like, what now? Right. And so those are the people I feel like supremely passionate about and very, very kind of protective of, because I feel like the idealists, these people are the people that will sacrifice everything because they believe so much in the mission. And so then they're more susceptible to being exploited, in my opinion, because most people who are focused on the bottom line, money, like I don't care if it doesn't make any money, they'll leave. But the people who believe in the mission, really helping people, will stay and literally like cut their wrists, whatever is necessary, at their own sacrifice in order to get it done. So those are people I felt very, very called to serve. And so that meant that I was getting certified as a personal and executive coach in positive psychology. I went and got trained in all of Brene Brown's work, Dare to Lead, Daring Way, because I felt like, like a lot of the things that I was suffering with, I thought I was the only one. And I wanted to teach people how to be vulnerable and how to share and all of that. But then I realized that I was having them be vulnerable in places that are toxic. So then how do you learn to thrive in places that are toxic or war zones and chaotic? Look at COVID. But back then this hadn't happened, but I had that feeling that I wanted to get prepared for that. And so that's when I went and got trained with a retired Navy SEAL and got certified in an unbeatable mind and learned about mental toughness and emotional resilience. And as I was doing that, then I learned about they had a foundation called the Courage Foundation, which focuses on veterans with post-traumatic stress. To me, the military, the warriors, the veterans are the ultimate idealists because you're willing to die for the thing that you believe in. And so I felt like I wanted to do whatever, I was already like being of service to physicians, but I was like, I felt this like really intense, like devotion to the veterans and just this sense of, again, coming from the developing world where like democracy is like, what's that? Right. And just seeing these people who are willing to lay themselves down to, to preserve democracy, whatever that means. And, just for the mission, right. I then became very passionate about the mission of Courage Foundation, and they had this challenge to do 22 million burpees, and they were trying to get as many people as possible to do it. And I signed up. I mean, look at me, I'm a full-figured, Black woman.
Yes.
Yes. I am not the buffest. I have, I'm well endowed, or what can I say? But like, I was doing it because I believed so much in the mission to be of service. So I wasn't some random crazy girl. Maybe I was like doing, but that whole WDS that year, I was doing all the burpees. Yes. I was trying to get my numbers. I had pledged 22,000 burpees that year. So I was trying to get those burpees. Get them done.
And I didn't think you were a random
and raise
person.
Money. But I know I felt like a random crazy person.
I always remember you as the girl who was doing the burpees outside the auditorium. And then someone, I think it was your kids, were like, "Is that you, Mom?" I was like, "No." Like, we look like twins. And so that's how we just got to know each other. But I like, the thing I love about the name, the Thriving Idealist, is I feel like, in my life, I've always, when people call me an idealist, it's normally not, and it's normally not
derogatory.
It's normally a derogatory.
I'm taking back that word. That's part of my mission, to take back that word. Because people think about the idealist as, just dreaming in the
Pie in the
clouds and I'm
sky.
unrealistic. No, the ideals means values. It means like virtues and values. So I believe that the true idealist is a person who believes so much in the ideals that they're willing to roll up their sleeves and get in the mud, and they will sacrifice and do whatever. The person who's just there dreaming is not a true idealist. The true idealist is the one who has sacrificed and bled to make sure that they fulfilled and embodied those ideals that they hold dear. So I'm taking back that word.
I love that.
That's my stand. I am willing to die on that stand. I
absolutely love that, because like I said, even recently I had a friend and she was like, "You're such an idealist," but it's such a derogatory term, and I'm just like, just because I think for some people they feel like because you're an idealist, it's almost like a refusal to accept the real world, and I'm like, I'm not crazy. I can see the real world right there, but I feel like if you lose sight of those ideals, then you're just compromising your way away from what could be a good situation. If you keep those ideals in mind, you might not reach them, but you're certainly going to have a much better chance of getting close to them than if you just keep compromising your way away from them. So I guess I'm happy to be an idealist, but I know it's not normally a positive term. So I love that you're taking that back.
No, we're taking it. I'm on the move. This has been what, 10 years, a 10-year journey to take that word back, which is, if when we get to the quote, I don't know when you want me to give you that quote, but my quote is actually about that.
I just wanted to let you know how you can support us over here at Writing Black Joy. Firstly, you can join our Patreon community over at patreon.com/Sophia Robinson, and you'll find the link for that in the show notes. When you sign up over at Patreon to support us, you will get the opportunity to join our monthly group coaching calls and workshops that we'll be holding exclusively for Patreon supporters. So come on over and join the party. It's so much fun over there. Other ways you can support us: hit subscribe here on your podcast or over on the YouTube channel. You can also leave a podcast review, like our YouTube episodes, and share us with your friends. You can head over to our website and sign up for our mailing list, www.writingblackjoy.com. Also, follow Writing Black Joy over on Instagram at Writing Black Joy. All of these will be in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening and for supporting our show.
One of the things I love about WDS, again, other than normalizing, is the writing for me was that was where I think it was in 2014. 2014 was the year that Chris Guillebeau did. He talked about, I think, the book, The Happiness of Pursuit. He had the book. And that same year was the year that, what's his name? AJ Jacobs, the guy who always does these experiments. And he did the experiment on the whole year of living biblically.
Yes.
Where he,
about that.
And then that's always funny. He tried to live like everything in the Bible word for word. And it was hilarious, including like, whether or not to have a sex with women when she's like pushing his woman out of the house when she was on her period and blah, blah, blah. I mean, his beard.
Whenever people talk about living biblically, the first thing that pops into my mind for some reason is burning down the house that has mildew. For this is just some verse in Leviticus somewhere, and I'm just like, okay, I don't know why, but for some reason,
exactly. So he was doing the whole Leviticus, he was doing and it's hilarious, and he's very funny. And then that same year, there was a poem catcher. It's just 2014 was my first year. It was my first year at WDS. So there was also a poem catcher. I can't remember his name now, but he was going around catching poems. He had this butterfly nets. He was going around. He was dressed. It was really cool. And basically he would read different poems or different places at WDS. And also he would make people write. So, and this was my first year, and I had burned out of medicine like a few years before that, and had just entered this portal that is WDS and Good Life Project. I hadn't even gone to Good Life Project yet. That was the same first year too that I went to Good Life Project. But at WDS, that was my first time entering this world in person. And he was going around and just asking and reading poems, or then asking people to write poems on the spot. So I hadn't done anything creative at all for many years because I'd had the burnout experience. I'd forgotten who I was. And he came to me And there was this cruise that we were on, and he tapped on me and asked me to write a poem. And I was like, I haven't done this. I'd forgotten who I was. And I sat down and like wrote something and I gave it to him. And when I did that on the spot, realizing that I could create anything on the spot, I came back from WDS that year and started like a year-long quest to write a haiku a day.
Yes, Yvonne tries haiku. I'm sorry. I know. You have so many hashtags that I absolutely love. The two I remember are Yvonne tries meditation and Yvonne tries haiku.
Yes. Yeah. So that's how Yvonne tries haiku started. And I didn't know anything about haiku. I'm not from this like, rich background that way. The way I even heard about haikus was when I was crashing and burning during residency. And I didn't have any friends. And I was an internal medicine and pediatrics combined residency where you squeeze 6 years into 4. And I had a 4-month-old baby at the time, 3 months, and I was by myself. Anyway, just not a very good picture. I was in hell. But one of the things I remembered from that time was that when I would rotate through the pediatrics residency, you had to switch between the pediatrics, hanging out with the pediatrics department and then going to internal medicine. And whenever I'd go to the pediatrics, I just felt so alone. I mean, they were friendly, but they were all friendly together. And they would always talk about haikus that they'd written that day. And I was like, I don't know what that is. Nobody ever included me in the conversation. Of course, I'm the only Black person too, so it doesn't help. It doesn't help me feel any more included. But they would talk about the haikus they'd written. They'd all talk about it. And the residency director is like talking with them. And I'm just like a mosquito on the wall. And that stayed with me because like I was like outside looking in, even though I was in the room, I was burning out. I felt alienated. They were all younger than I was. I had this new baby and I had no support. My partner wasn't there at the time. So it was just like the really traumatic, I think it just kind of imprinted on me. But when I came back from WGS in 2014, and again, that was my first year, and that combination of the poem catcher, the Happiness of Pursuit, where Chris Gillibo talked about, the importance of like, pursuing something, like the happiness, joy of that, and which is an amazing book, by the way. And then the A.J. Jacobs doing his year of living biblically, something about those three coming together. I just thought about, okay, I am going to write a haiku every day and share it. Didn't know anything about haikus. I just knew the rule 5-7-5. That was all I knew. Five syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, and
5 again in the third.
5 again. So I was like, okay, so that's what I'll do. And so every day I'd write whatever I'd learned that day. I would write and just share. And some were good, some were bad, some were cheesy, some were corny. I didn't care. What was important to me was learning how to create and do it consistently and not care about whether something was good or not, just learn how to, because I was so good at one of my things that people will know about me is that I am very good at hiding in plain sight. I am one of those people that I could be in front of you and you wouldn't know anything about me if I chose. Like I could just be there and focus on you, and I could know everything about you and you would know nothing about me. So I was trying to learn how to allow myself to be seen, allow myself to create, because I was tired of this kind of hiding all the time. And so that became the thing. And I did that for, I think was like, ended up with like over 1,000, and then I stopped. And then throughout the pandemic, I started again. So I've written like one, but haven't shared. So I stopped sharing consistently like after 3 years, because I was like, it was starting to become like a way of hiding in a way, because then I was no longer writing long form.
Yes.
So I have like over 1,000 haikus floating around somewhere on the internet, and then I have quite a few more that I've written during the pandemic. But the haikus were a great thing for me to do, to like, I really love like reflecting on what I've learned that day, or like I can be pretty like, I can be pretty introspective that way. It kind of helps me process the day, or like just kind of comment on whatever it is I'm struggling with, right? Just learning how to get it out and not judge myself so much, and not get so perfectionistic as I can be, right? It can be crippling for me. So the haikus was a great way. And then the blog. And then I co-wrote a book on thinking about quitting medicine with a group of African-American or Black physicians who were at the crossroads of like, you know, when you get to that point where you're like, okay, do I quit or do I stay? And if I'm going to stay, how do I do that? So think of, and then songwriting, I did publish a demo. I did do a demo and got a record deal the same week or so as I got into med school and I chose to go to med school.
Wow.
So those are all my writing kind of experiences, and I've just
Everywhere.
done a lot of writing, and this kind of varied and kind of all over the place. And but
yeah, and that's good. I feel like for a lot of us that is very true. We write, you know, I can think for me, like I said, it was those emails, it was my blog. I still blog, but you know, I think for me one of the hardest things when I sort of over the last couple of years started doing more coaching for writers, editing, and having to write like, you know, blog content, quote unquote, is that like, I was just like, but I want to write my stories. Like I like, you know, I write romance novels and superheroes and that type of thing.
Yes.
So making sure that I still make the time for that. So I love your idea about the haikus though, because I think the thing about a haiku is that it's so short that you kind of it's like you have to almost get super creative in a way to kind of put that information into such a short space. It's almost easier to write long form and to write 50 pages or whatever than it is to like encapsulate it into these few syllables. So I always love to see your haikus when they popped up.
Yes.
Tell me, we're not gonna for those who've been watching this a long time, they probably follow the rhythm of all the questions. We're not going to get to all the questions for sure today. As I've been saying to all my guests, I'm sure I'm going to have Yvonne back because I feel as if everybody I wanted to have back. So we'll have to do that at some point. But I do want to know why this topic of writing Black joy is important to you. Because for me, it wasn't just about highlighting the writers and the creators, but it was also the joyful aspect of it. You know, anybody who's been listening to this for any amount of time knows my feelings on that. You know, us seeing ourselves reflected with joy. Why is it important to you?
You know, it's important to me because, like I said, like coming up, I didn't see it at all. It wasn't even like seeing joy. It was that I didn't see it at all. Like I didn't see it at all. So, and the thing with writing or creativity in general is, especially being Black, is like there are so many expectations, or people have expectations of what they think you should write about, and people always wanted me to talk about race. I grew up in Nigeria, and I live in the US, and I was born in the UK, and like the way I see myself, I mean I see my skin color, but that's not like all that I am. Like a lot of us immigrants, we kind of had that thing where it's like, you know, I'm equal. I'm me. And I just happen to have chocolate skin. Right. And so, but people would think with creativity is sometimes everybody else is trying to impose their ideas on you. And I feel like writing Black joy is important to me because I feel like it's the place that I can be. It's okay to express whatever that is, right? I'm very geeky and nerdy about personal development, especially values. And so like, even in my newsletters, which are actually how I do my long form writing now, and I'm starting to share more publicly now, but I write about values. I write about cultivating. That's my thing. My byline, my slogan for my Thriving Idealist is cultivate your light. And so I'm always writing about cultivating your values, cultivating self-mastery, cultivating creativity, cultivating, like I am all about, and people wanted me to write about other things, but part of my joy is having that freedom, is being able to say, to write about, you know, like policing. I don't want to write about like, you know, whatever thing that Black people are groaning about. I'm like, let me be free to express myself however the spirit catches me. I want to fall however the spirit catches me, and not have these idea. And I feel like my writing liberates me. It frees me, because like people look at me and they have an idea of who they think I should be, and they read my writing, and like you cannot, like, no matter how much you want to judge me, you cannot help but see the writing as what it is, which I mean, like, so it's like, there's this title, Cal Newport says, you know, so good that they can't ignore you. I feel like with writing, it's the way in which like you just cannot ignore it. Like, cause like you can't see the color of the writing.
No, you just see the writing.
But
and I
by
love
the time
that.
you know it, you're engrossed, you're already in. I mean, it's black and white, you know, it's like it's a leveler, it's the equalizer. And to be able to share your authenticity and we're not a monolith, and to be able to share all the different colors of our lives and our personalities and our perspectives, all the different hues of that. Like it just is, I can tell from my voice, is like very exciting to me to be able to be able to reflect that. I feel like, you know, with this box that people try to put us in, writing is a way of like saying what box, you know, there is no spoon, there is no box. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I absolutely love that so much. I'd love you to share that quote with us now that you were talking about earlier. Yes.
Yeah. So being an idealist, you know, being all about ideals, there are two quotes. The first quote that I was really about when I was coming up, because I felt like my writing had to be of service and everything I did had to be of service, was I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know is that the only ones who will be truly happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve. That's by Albert Schweitzer. That's the quote that got me all the way through med school, all the way through to here. But then as I started like learning about how important values were to me and how important ideals were to me, there's this other quote that Albert Schweitzer had that I actually built my whole business, my whole work, my whole thing on, which is grow into your ideals so that life will not rob you of them. That's the quote I live by all day, every day, right? Because like we have these ideals that we say are important to us. We have to be able to embody them and cultivate them and grow into them, or else life will take will, when life hits, like it's so easy to be like, oh, okay, no, uncle, like crying uncle, you throw your hands up.
Yeah.
But when you've been cultivating them and you're deciding to embody, you know, it's a daily practice. It's like the difference between, will I cuss this person out or will I take a deep breath and find a way to connect? Like I actually have to have those, like, how will I grow into my ideals in this moment, as opposed to how will I disconnect or uproot my values in this moment. It's like a moment to moment practice for me. And that's what I live by. That's what I build everything on. Grow into your ideals so that life will not rob you of them.
Yeah. Oh, I really, really love that. And I like that because sometimes, like I've found over the sort of last couple of years with the pandemic, feeling like life was turning me into a person that I didn't want to be. And it's such a good way, it's a good reminder that like every moment you still get to choose who you are, regardless of what life is kind of throwing at you from the outside. So I just love that. That's an amazing quote. I really, really, really like it. So just a couple more questions. One is, what's been one of your proudest writer or creative moments?
One of my proudest creative moments. I mean, like, even though the book I didn't really appreciate the publishing process. Mm-hmm. I was very proud of the book that I co-wrote, like being able to have the courage to get my story out. It's just had a chapter in it, but like being able to get that out was really, really, and again, it was like a medical, like it was like a way of, it was going to be of service. So like, I was very proud of that moment. I think being able to ship out being able to write how many at this point, like it's 7 years worth, at least 5 years worth of haikus. That's something that, again, I'm one of those ADD types that people, was labeled that I would not be able to finish anything or do anything. To be able to have such a consistent practice of writing has been like incredible. So I think those two, having a good body of work of cultivating different values that I've written over the years. Yeah. So I think for me that is just proud. I think the pride thing would be the consistency that I've managed to have, even though I have all of these struggles and all of these challenges that I've had with, getting divorced, becoming homeless at one point, being a single mom, and losing everything. Somehow, somewhere in there, I've been able to discover this thing that allows me to express myself, and it opens doors for me that I would never even consider walking through.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing I want to say about the book that you wrote about thinking about leaving medicine, I think this is something that I've had so many conversations with medics, with dentists, people who have considered leaving the profession. I personally have as well. And the reality that it's hard to walk away from something when you spent your life thinking that this is the thing.
Yes.
Right? It's hard to do that.
Sunk costs. Yes. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of my day, so my day-to-day is pretty much coaching a lot of physicians and helping professionals, and also doing workshops. And I mean, I have dentists, I have vets, I have EMTs, I have PAs, I have all of them, even lab scientists. And, people think that they have to blow up their lives and quit. And it's not, to me, that's not, I mean, I did that because I didn't know any better. I didn't have anyone going, hey, Yvonne. And that's why I really went and studied Brene Brown's work, because I didn't know everybody else was struggling around me. If I had known, if someone had said something to me and made me feel less alone, I would have stayed, right? I would have found a way, but I didn't know. No one said anything to me. There was no support. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, because people feel like they have to blow up their lives, and it's terrifying. So then they stay stuck. Sometimes it's not about leaving the profession. Sometimes it's really about like rediscovering the values that brought you into the profession, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing with my clients, because people are like, I'm going to quit. I'm like, well, let's deal with the burnout first, because the burnout is that the values that brought you in this thing are not the values that you're actually practicing on a day-to-day basis. Let's rediscover what those values are, because chances are you've forgotten them, or they've been thrown away, or you've been forced to abandon them, right? Because of whatever system you're in. How can we rediscover what those values or ideals are and bring you back into alignment, so that you can then like feel the sense of purpose again. And sure enough, when we do the values work, and of course there's other stuff we do as well, but when we do the values work, especially, that's where I really see when they come into alignment, then suddenly it's like, it's not really about leaving. It's about finding the right spot. It might be that you might have to move to another spot, or find a different position, or maybe find a different, practice or whatever. But it's not necessarily about blowing up your life is not even in alignment with your ideals. So please don't do that, right? So especially if you have a family or kids, being able to spend some time for some introspection, recalibrating, really coming into alignment, and then from there, then you can see like which way to go. But
and make the decision from that place, from an empowered place, as opposed to making
empowered and aligned place.
A place where you're so burnt out that there were times when I felt like I would pick the trash up rather than do this thing. And you don't want to make decisions from that place, because it's not a sensible place to make those decisions from, right?
It's not empowering. And if anything, it robs you of your options, and you want to be able to and it's out of alignment. And that ends up costing, because that's what I did. I was like, F this, blow it up. And like, it destroyed my life. I literally had to rebuild my life from scratch, like redesign it. So I always tell people, like, it's not about, yes, burnout sucks, but it's not really about blowing up your life. It's about pausing and really coming back into assessing where you are, coming back, seeing how far off you are from what really matters to you, coming back into alignment from that, and making your decisions from there,
from that place.
Because then you can see, because the values light up. They're like the headlights. They're like the guideposts and the compass. So if you're driving around in the dark without a GPS, like you're gonna crash.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, one last question before I ask you to tell folks where they can find you is, what advice might you give a creative, multi-passionate person such as yourself?
The advice I would give would be a couple. because I feel like it's never just one thing, but authenticity, I think, is the most important thing. I think recently I've been kind of looking back on my life for whatever reason, feel like I've been having these. I saw a video recently of myself from 5 years ago, and I was saying something that I could have said today, and I was just like, wow, like younger Yvonne, like you're still on the path. And she was being authentic to who she was then. And a lot of us are like looking out there, like, I mean, I'm always looking at future me and all of that. But the thing is, the future self that you're looking for is actually in you. It's just a matter of unfolding, and like this idea of constant emergence. You're just the more you do the work, the more you chip away at the surface, and the more the truer and higher self continues to emerge. But all of that is in you. All of that to say that the space between where you are and where you want to be is really the practice. So being true to yourself and showing up, making the commitment to show up no matter what, being able to express whatever it is, however imperfect it is. I think for some of us, perfectionism can be paralyzing, where it's Absolutely. Like we have this idea. I know that's what almost destroyed me with the guitar, because like in my head, I'm hearing like Jimi Hendrix,
Carlos Santana.
I'm hearing Jimmy Page. I am a hardcore hard rock, like classic rock, like Lenny Kravitz, all these people who are amazing. And I play and I sound like, it's like, boink, boink, it's like, so, but because I see that space, there's such a huge gap. I don't want to practice. I don't want to play because I sound like crap. But being able to, authentically be yourself and then choose to show up. And it's in the showing up that we get better and we bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be. So that authenticity is so important. We look around and we see, and your creativity is really the antidote to comparison. You look around and you see people doing all kinds of things and you feel like you need to copy them. You really want to be authentic to yourself and allow yourself to express whatever is coming up, because that's everything that we, every contribution that we make in this life that is going to be of any value is going to be out of our creativity. That's what Brene Brown says, right? So what you create is your legacy. What you create is how you make your mark in the world. And so even if it's imperfect, which it will be 100% of the time, right? That's where it's at, being able to show up as you are and be able to show up authentically. And if anything, try to be as consistent. I think consistency has been like for me, consistency has been the catalyst, has been like the secret sauce. Learning how to build consistency as a muscle, learning how to cultivate consistency was never something that I was good at. I had a very chaotic background. So consistency was very like this faraway thing. And I had to be, that's part of why I did the haikus, learning to really value consistency and became a sexy word to me. And that's the thing that I feel like I am constantly trying to cultivate. And so authenticity, right? Showing up, creating consistently. And then the quality will improve as you continue to show up.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's perfect. So where can anyone who is interested find you? I know you do a lot of workshops in terms of, you have obviously you do the Daring Way from Brene Brown. You have obviously your personal private coaching practice. Where can people find you? Thriving idealist that you are.
Thrivingidealist.com, Yvonne Ator. Yvonne Ator is like the hub for everything. My website is, it's not, I mean, it is what it is, but like, that's where you'll probably find like all the links to like my Thriving Idealist work, Thriving Physicians, some of my writings, but Yvonne Ator at all the handles. I'm not really as consistent with social media, not because I can't be consistent, but more trying to keep the noise down as much as I can in my life. But on all the social media, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, Yvonne Ator is the handle and the website as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me, Yvonne. I have a question that I'm going to save for our next conversation, which I'm sure will spark
off a whole one. It's okay.
other thing, but I have to say, I honestly do feel like I'm going to have to just do another season where I'm just bringing back all my favorite guests, which is going to be everyone, and do it all over again, because it has been so much fun. Really enjoyed chatting.
I definitely want to have you on my podcast, Thriving Idealists, when it gets out. But
I
yes.
would absolutely love that. I would love that. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. And let's keep twinning. I'll see you out there.
Let's keep twinning. I'm loving your hair. I'm loving it so much.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I look forward to seeing you in the internet streets. All right.
Sounds good. All right. You take care.
Everyone else that's watching, happy reading, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the notes below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new episodes when they drop. And if this has inspired you to get your own writing project into the world, click on my website below and learn how you can work with me as a writing coach or an editor. Until next time, I send you big love from a small island.